Chowchilla, California, in the summer of 1976 was the kind of place people described as ordinary. A quiet farming town in the San Joaquin Valley, it was surrounded by orchards, dusty roads, and a rhythm of life that hadn't changed much in decades. Families felt safe, neighbors knew one another, and children played freely in the streets until the sky turned orange at dusk. The thought of something dark or sinister touching this community seemed impossible. But on July 15, 1976, that small-town sense of safety would be shattered. That afternoon, a yellow school bus made its familiar route home from summer school. Inside were 26 children, ranging from kindergartners just learning their ABCs to teenagers nearly ready for high school. Some were brothers and sisters, others were neighbors, all part of the same little community. Their bus driver, 55-year-old Frank Edward Ed Ray, was behind the wheel. Ed Ray wasn't just a driver. He was a farmer by trade, a man who spent his life working the land. But everyone in Chowchilla knew him as the dependable, steady bus driver who took care of the town's children as if they were his own. He was quiet, humble, and deeply respected. Parents trusted him completely, and the children felt safe with him. They called him Mr. Ray, and he was as much a fixture in their daily lives as the bus itself. The ride home that day felt as ordinary as any other. The younger children laughed and shouted in the back, trading snacks and playing games. The older ones sat near the front, tired and eager to get home. Some pressed their foreheads to the windows, staring dreamily at the golden fields outside. The bus rattled along the road, filled with the everyday noise of childhood. But then, everything changed. As the bus turned onto a narrow dirt road, Ed noticed a white van blocking the way. At first, he thought it was just a farmer who'd broken down, someone in need of help. But as he slowed, the van doors swung open. Out stepped two men wearing ski masks, each holding a shotgun. A third man stood behind them, watching carefully. The laughter inside the bus stopped. The children stared wide-eyed. Some clutched their backpacks, others froze, unsure of what was happening. One of the masked men climbed onto the bus, his voice sharp and commanding. "Everybody stay quiet. This is a hijack. Do what we say, and no one gets hurt." The words hung in the air like poison. The younger children began to cry. The older ones glanced nervously at Ed Ray, waiting for him to act. But with a gun pointed directly at him, Ed had no choice but to comply. The second man barked an order, "Everyone off." Now. One by one, the terrified children were forced out of their seats. They shuffled down the narrow aisle, some trembling, some sobbing quietly. Outside, two vans sat waiting. The windows were covered in black paint, the doors wide open. The children and Ed were herded inside, crammed together in the suffocating heat. The doors slammed shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness. The smell of gasoline and sweat filled the air. The vans pulled away, leaving the yellow bus abandoned in the middle of the dusty road, silent, empty, and eerie. The journey that followed felt endless. For 11 long hours, the vans drove through backroads and highways, circling, stopping, starting again. The kidnappers wanted to disorient their captives, to make sure no one knew where they were being taken. Inside the vans, the air grew stifling. Children shifted uncomfortably, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Some whispered prayers. Others clung to their siblings. A few of the younger ones cried for their mothers, their voices muffled in the oppressive dark. Ed Ray tried to stay calm for their sake. He moved carefully, speaking softly, reassuring them again and again, "Stay together. Stay strong. We'll get through this." His calm voice became an anchor in the chaos, something steady for the children to hold on to. But even Ed was afraid. He didn't know who these men were, what they wanted, or where they were taking them. He only knew one thing. He was responsible for 26 children, and he had to keep them alive. Meanwhile, back in Chowchilla, panic spread like wildfire. Parents expected their children home by mid-afternoon. When they didn't arrive, the calls began, first to neighbors, then to the sheriff's office. By early evening, dozens of frantic parents crowded into the small police station, demanding answers. "My daughter never came home. My boy should have been off the bus 2 hours ago. Where is the bus? Where is Ed?" Deputies scrambled to respond. A search began immediately. Patrol cars sped down country roads, deputies scanning the fields for any sign of the missing bus. As night fell, one of the search teams found it. The yellow school bus sat abandoned on a dirt road, its engine off, its seats empty. There was no sign of the children. No sign of Ed. The discovery turned panic into sheer terror. Word spread quickly. Reporters rushed in from across the state. Television crews broadcast live from the heart of Chowchilla. The story of the missing bus was suddenly national news. The FBI was called in overnight. Helicopters searched the orchards and fields. Roadblocks were set up. It was the largest manhunt California had ever seen. But there was no trace of the children or their driver. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Parents clung to one another outside the school and police station, weeping, begging for news. The town was drowning in fear. No one slept that night. While the world searched, the children and Ed Ray were still trapped in the dark vans, their bodies sore, their throats dry. Time dragged on endlessly. Some children dozed fitfully, only to wake up in terror. Others sat silently, their eyes wide with fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the vans slowed. They came to a stop. The doors opened. Blinding light and shouts filled the air. One by one, the children and Ed were ordered out. Their legs shook from hours of confinement. They were led across gravel and dirt until they saw it, a hole in the ground. It looked like the entrance to a bunker, its opening covered in boards. The kidnappers forced the group inside. A wooden ladder led down into darkness. The children hesitated, but the men shoved them forward. Down they went, into the earth, into a space that smelled of dirt and metal. Mattresses were scattered across the floor. Water jugs and boxes of food sat against the walls. It looked like a prison. Then the kidnappers climbed out and slammed a heavy metal lid across the opening. Boards and dirt followed, sealing it shut. The sound echoed like a death knell. The realization hit like thunder. They had been buried alive. The silence underground was suffocating. When the kidnappers sealed the opening above them with wood, metal, and dirt, the sound echoed through the buried van like a final verdict. For the 26 children and their bus driver Ed Ray, the realization sank in, they were trapped beneath the earth. The chamber itself was eerie. It was a moving van that had been crudely converted into a makeshift bunker. The kidnappers had parked it deep inside a rock quarry and buried it under dirt and debris. Inside, the walls were lined with mattresses. Jugs of water, boxes of cereal, peanut butter, and bread were stacked in one corner. There was even a crude ventilation system, made from air hoses sticking up through the ground. To the kidnappers, this was a carefully designed prison. But to the children, it was a tomb. At first, the kids tried to convince themselves that they would be released soon. Maybe the men just wanted money. Maybe their parents were already working with the police. But as the hours passed, fear began to overwhelm them. The air inside the buried van grew hot and stale. The younger children cried in the arms of the older ones. Some whispered prayers. Others clung to Ed Ray, begging him not to let them die. Ed himself was terrified, but he knew he had to keep control. His role as their protector had never been clearer. He walked among the children, checking on each one, offering water, whispering calm words, promising them that they would survive. Still, as the hours dragged on, the fear of suffocation grew real. The ventilation system was weak. The air thinned, heavy with the smell of sweat and dirt. Children grew dizzy. Some became silent, too exhausted to cry anymore. Above ground, panic consumed Chowchilla. The story dominated national headlines. FBI agents flooded the area. Helicopters crisscrossed the skies. Reporters hounded police officers, asking the same question every parent was asking, "Where are the children?" The abandoned yellow bus had been found hours earlier, empty on a dusty road. To many, it was the most chilling image of all, a symbol of innocence turned into mystery. The FBI worked around the clock, interviewing witnesses, canvassing roads, and following every lead. But the trail was cold. The kidnappers had vanished without leaving a trace. Parents gathered at the school gymnasium, now turned into a crisis center. They wept in each other's arms. Some shouted at investigators. Others simply stared at the doors, praying that their children would walk through them. The entire town was living a nightmare. Meanwhile, in the underground van, Ed Ray refused to give up. He knew waiting for rescue wasn't an option. They had food and water, yes, but no guarantee of survival. The kidnappers might never return. The ventilation could fail. The walls could collapse. The only way out was up. Ed rallied the older boys, teenagers strong enough to help. Together, they examined the roof of the chamber, a heavy metal lid, reinforced with wood and buried under dirt. It seemed impossible to move. But Ed urged them to try. Using a piece of wood as a lever, they began pushing against the lid. Again and again, they strained, their muscles aching, sweat pouring down their faces. At times, the lid refused to budge. Dirt trickled down, choking them. Some of the children begged them to stop, convinced it was hopeless. But Ed insisted. "Don't quit. We have to try. For the little ones. For all of us." The effort dragged on for hours. Every push seemed to sap their strength. At one point, the lid shifted slightly, just enough to let in a faint draft of cooler air. It was the spark they needed. They kept pushing, digging, clawing at the dirt with their bare hands. Finally, after what felt like forever, the lid gave way. A shaft of light pierced the darkness. One by one, the children scrambled up, clawing through dirt, gasping as they emerged into the early morning air of July 16, 1976. They had been trapped underground for 16 terrifying hours. But they were alive. The sight of the children staggering out of the earth was nothing short of miraculous. Covered in dirt, exhausted, and trembling, they climbed out into the quarry and stumbled toward safety. The oldest helped carry the youngest. Ed Ray, filthy and worn but unbroken, guided them every step of the way. They made their way to a guard shack at the quarry, where stunned workers immediately called the police. Within hours, news spread, the children and their bus driver had been found alive. The nightmare was over. When the families were reunited, the scenes were overwhelming. Parents clutched their children as if they would never let go again. Tears flowed freely. Reporters captured images of mothers sobbing, fathers hugging their sons and daughters, townspeople cheering and weeping together. Against all odds, every single child and their driver had survived. The investigation quickly turned to the men responsible. It didn't take long for police to identify them. Frederick Woods, 24, and brothers Richard and James Schoenfeld, 24 and 22. All three came from wealthy families in California. They weren't desperate men, they were greedy. The plan had been simple but twisted: kidnap a busload of children, demand a ransom of $5 million, and vanish rich. They had even prepared the underground chamber to hold their captives until the money was paid. But in their arrogance, they underestimated their victims. While the kidnappers slept, trying to recover from exhaustion, Ed Ray and the children saved themselves. All three men were captured within weeks. They were charged with 27 counts of kidnapping with ransom and sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, the Schoenfeld brothers were eventually paroled. Frederick Woods remains in prison to this day. For the survivors, however, freedom came with scars. Many of the children grew up with deep trauma. Some battled lifelong fears of the dark or enclosed spaces. Others suffered nightmares that lasted for years. The memory of being buried alive as a child never fully left them. Ed Ray, though hailed as a hero, carried the weight of the ordeal too. He had been their anchor, their protector, the man who refused to give up. California honored him for his bravery, and the children never forgot the role he played in saving their lives. To this day, he is remembered as the man who refused to let fear win. The Chowchilla kidnapping remains one of the most infamous crimes in American history, not only because of its scale, but because of its ending. It was a story of terror, greed, and unimaginable fear. But it was also a story of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable will to survive. Even now, decades later, the image still chills: a buried van, sealed shut, holding 26 children and a bus driver. And the miracle that, against all odds, they made it out alive. It is remembered as the day a school bus full of kids simply never came back, and the day an entire town learned what survival truly meant.